بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلي وأسلم على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اهتدى بهديه واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We begin in today's class a new chapter, one of the pillars of Islam, and that is the pillar of fasting the month of Ramadan. And linguistically, fasting means to refrain. So when the mother of Maryam vowed that what was in her belly to be a servant of Allah Azza wa Jal, not knowing that it was a female. And when Maryam herself vowed not to speak a soul, she described this as إني نذرت للرحمن صوما فلن أكلم اليوم إنسيا. I have vowed to refrain from speaking. That is, I vowed to fast from speaking. So linguistically, fasting is to refrain. Technically, as you will find in your textbook, it is to refrain, to abstain from everything that nullifies your fasting. And we will come to discuss this later on, inshallah. So these things that nullify fasting, such as eating, drinking, whatever takes the ruling of eating and drinking, like IV fluids, glucose, ejaculation, intercourse, menstruation, postnatal bleeding, and so on, to abstain and refrain from these things. Okay. And the timing is also essential. That is, from the break of dawn until the sun sets. Okay, I've done that. And there is an important also addition that is not mentioned in your textbook. You should add it. And that is with the intention of worshipping Allah. And the book will talk about this point later on, being a pillar of fasting. Because I can abstain from eating and drinking from the break of dawn till sunset, but with the intention of only going for a diet. Would that count? The answer is no. It has to be with the intention of worshipping Allah. Likewise, a prisoner, someone who was stranded on an island. So by default, he abstained from eating and drinking simply because there is no food nor drink. And it was from the break of dawn till sunset. Would he be considered fasting? The answer is no, because his intention was not included, and hence Allah does not accept such a ibadah, such a worship, without an intention. Then we have the spiritual concept of fasting, and there are 8 points. You can read those on your spare time. Number 6, at the very end, it says that there's a hadith: Satan has his way with a human being like his own blood, restrict his path by hunger. The phrase restrict his path by hunger is not authentic, so you should scratch that out. So read these 8 points on your own time to get the benefits out of it. What are the conditions for fasting? Now, there are a number of conditions. Number one, being a Muslim. And this is a condition in Allah accepting your deeds. So Allah Azza wa Jal does not accept the deeds except of those who are Muslim, who are submitting their will to Allah Azza wa Jal. And this is why Allah mentioned in Surah Al-Furqan, وَقَدِمْنَا إِلَى مَا عَمِلُوا مِنْ عَمَلٍ فَجَعَلْنَاهُ هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا, that all what the non-Muslims have done in this world, we shall make it, or we shall turn it into dust on the Day of Judgment. Meaning Allah does not accept this. So non-Muslims, if they offer good deeds, they build orphanages, they feed the hungry, they honor their words and commitments, they do a lot of good things, no doubt about that. But because they do not believe in Allah Azza wa Jal, they did not submit their will to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah does not accept these deeds. Yes, Allah feeds them in this world, Allah offers to them provision, gives them health, gives them what they want. So what Allah has compensated them with in this life is more than what they had provided and offered of good deeds and worship and forms of worship, so that on the Day of Judgment they come and they have nothing to show up for. Number two, puberty. And fasting is not obligatory upon those who did not attain the age of puberty, but it is definitely something that they are encouraged to do. And this is why the youngsters are instructed, are recommended to try their level best, that they train early age, as the companions used to do. The companions used to order the children to fast until it was dhuhr time. This is when they feel the pinch of hunger most. So they start to cry. So their parents give them toys made of wool, dummies and dolls to play with. Not dummies, dolls to play with. This means that their fasting is accepted, but it is not mandatory because they have not reached the age of puberty. Number three, sanity, which means that a person who's mentally ill, a person who's classified as insane, even if he fasts, this does not count. And in so many times or cases, a mentally ill person may not eat or drink from sunset, from sunrise, from the break of dawn till sunset. This so happens. That doesn't mean that a fasting day is counted, because the Prophet told us ﷺ, that the pen has been uplifted except from three categories of people: a child until he reaches the age of puberty, a person who's asleep until he wakes up, and a person who's insane until he regains his sanity. Number four, a condition that does not impact the validity of the fasting, but those who do not have it are exempted from fasting, and that is to be in sound health. In the verses talking about fasting, and there are two of them in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah says, فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ. And another verse, فَمَنْ كَانَ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلى سَفَرٍ. So here we find that the condition of obligation upon a person to fast is that he would be in a sound state of health, because the opposite of that is being sick, being marid. And sickness is relative. So I have a cut in my finger. I'm considered to be not in my sound state of health, but this is not a legitimate reason to skip fasting. Someone who has knee problems and he cannot pray standing up doesn't mean he's exempted from fasting. So the type of sickness that would exempt you from fasting is the type that would hinder your fasting, hinder your recovery, or harm you. In this case, you have to skip fasting to avoid all of this, as you have the concession, the permission from Allah Azza wa Jal to skip it. Now, having said that you skip it, definitely you're going to need to make them up, because Allah stated فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ, that you have to make them up later on other days, providing that your illness is curable. So someone who has a very bad stomach ache or a headache that prevents him, that stops him from fasting, he can skip fasting. But once he is recovered, he has to make up for these days. And if a person's illness is chronic, so a person has kidney failure, doctors say you won't be able to fast anymore. He's always on dialysis. He has a problem with diabetes, the type that if he does not eat something every couple of hours, he may fall sick and die. And doctors say you have to eat something every couple of hours. This is chronic. You will never recover. He can skip and feed one poor person for every day he misses. Number 5, being in one's place or of residence. And number 6, women who are in the period or having postnatal bleeding, not discharge. These are usually labeled by jurors as obstacles, free from obstacles. So part of the conditions of obligation of fasting upon each and every one of us is that he's free from obstacles. What obstacles? When a woman gets her menses or postnatal bleeding, consensus of scholars say that she cannot fast. Now, this consensus is agreed upon, but is it something that she can control? This is an obstacle. So this obstacle, due to its occurrence, she's exempted from fasting. Likewise, traveling. When a person travels, this is an obstacle that prevents a normal person from fasting. And this is dependent on the hardship, but even if it's a 10-minute flight or half an hour flight from point A to point B, which is considered to be a traveling distance within the community, in this case, one is exempted from fasting. If he fasts and there's no hardship on him, that's even great, and it's better. But we do not obligate him to do so, as he has the concession, he has the permission to skip it. And postnatal bleeding, alongside with monthly cycle, these are two excuses that the Sunnah came up to pardon a woman who has it from fasting. This is not mentioned in the Qur'an. So those who are misguided and only worship Allah Azza wa Jal through the Qur'an, as they claim, which they're not doing, they would probably deny this and obligate a woman to fast and pray even if she has her monthly cycle or postnatal bleeding. Of course, the women who are excused from fasting due to their postmortem bleeding or their monthly cycle, they are obliged to make up these missed days. A woman came to Aisha, and the hadith is in the Sahih. She said, why do women make up for the missed days they did not fast due to their monthly cycle, while they do not make up for the prayers they missed for the same reason? So Aisha was outraged, may Allah be pleased with her, our mother. And she said, are you from Harura, which is the hometown of the Khawarij? The Khawarij are the likes of people who have weird ideas depending on their intellect and logic rather than on the Qur'an and the Sunnah. And we have so many of those. We have so many people that whenever you speak to them, they will say, but logically this or that. What logic? We have the Qur'an and the Sunnah. So yeah, I looked into the Qur'an and Sunnah, I did not find it. And logically, blah, blah, blah. Akhi, you don't even know Arabic and you want to claim that you know the Qur'an and the Sunnah? There's a great defect in people's process of thinking and process of submitting their will to Allah Azza wa Jal without any arrogance or pride. So she said to that woman, are you from Harura? At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we were ordered, and whenever a companion says we were ordered, by default this means that it is the Prophet ﷺ. We were ordered to make up the fasts that we had missed and not to make up the prayers that we had missed. So this is clear, inshallah, to anyone that wants to follow the Quran and the Sunnah. Essentials. The definition of fasting in Islamic terms makes clear that it has two basic rukun, two basic pillars. So, the first pillar from the definition, to abstain, is to refrain, not to eat, not to drink, not to do any of the things that nullifies your fasting. This is clear. The second pillar, which is extremely important, and I began today's dars with, which is the intention. So you cannot have your fasting accepted without intention, because the Prophet said ﷺ, that deeds are judged by their intention. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. And when it comes to fasting, the intention of mandatory fastings must be done before. Okay, so I hope now we're live again. So fasting is divided into two types: mandatory types and voluntary types. As for the mandatory types, this is divided into three types as well. The mandatory fasting is divided into three categories. Each requires intention before the adhan of Fajr. You must have the intention at night, regardless whether you eat the pre-dawn meal known as suhoor or not. But you have to have the intention that you're fasting tomorrow. So the first category of mandatory fasting is the fasting of the month of Ramadan. And underneath it, also we can include the making up of missed days of Ramadan. due to sickness or to traveling. Number 2, vows. Vows are mandatory for us to fulfill, though initiating them is not something recommended, because Allah does not want you to enforce something upon yourself that Allah did not order you to do. And number 3 are the expiations. You take an oath by Allah's name and you were unable to fulfill it, you expiate by fasting 3 days. You make a mistake during Hajj in committing something that is prohibited, such as covering your head or wearing a shirt. You expiate by fasting 3 days, and so on. So many things. And this is not the time to go into details, but maybe, inshallah, we will come to discuss this in our chapter later on. So these are the 3 things that are mandatory. The voluntary fastings, such as fasting Mondays and Thursdays, the white days, David's fast, alternate day, each alternate day, fasting of the 10 days of the Hijjah, Ashura, Arafah, etc. These are all voluntary fastings. If you wake up in the morning, go to Fajr prayer, come back, and you did not eat or drink anything after the adhan, and at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, you said, what the heck, let me continue fasting, this is valid. This would count, and this is accepted, insha'Allah Azza wa Jal. So, where else are we in? So these are the essentials. Now, the status. Of course, fasting is one of the pillars of Islam. Allah Azza wa Jal mandated it in the Qur'an, Surah Al-Baqarah, Hadith Ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, where the Prophet said, ﷺ, that Islam was or has been built on 5 pillars, and fasting of Ramadan is one of them. And the hadith where a nomad came to the Prophet ﷺ and said to him, what are the things that are mandatory upon me? And the Prophet said ﷺ, to fast the month of Ramadan. And the man said, anything else? And the Prophet said, no, unless you want to volunteer. And he said, by Allah, I will not add or subtract any of what you had said. And he left. And the Prophet said ﷺ, that he is successful if he told the truth by abiding by the things that I had directed him to. And as stated, it's mentioned in the Qur'an, the obligation in the authentic Sunnah, and the consensus of all scholars of Islam. There's no difference among them, which means that anyone who rejects, anyone who does not believe in the obligation of fasting the month of Ramadan or doubts it, he's an apostate. And there are so many people who are like this nowadays, unfortunately. And these are enemies of Islam, without any doubt. So don't be delusional. Someone who comes and attack your Qur'an or interpret it in a way that is un-Islamic at all, where are you coming from? Or starts to cast doubts about the Sunnah. These people are not truth seekers. They're not known to be practicing Muslims. These are plain hypocrites trying to undermine Islam. The Prophet ﷺ suffered immensely from them when he was in Medina. They plotted against Islam and the Muslims. They tried their level best to annihilate Islam and failed miserably with the grace of Allah. And that's what's happening to them nowadays. But the problem is that Allah mentioned in the Quran, وَفِيكُمْ سَمَّاعُونَ لَهُمْ. There are among you, O Muslims, who pay attention to what they say. And this is a serious offense, because this illustrates how weak your iman is. When we hear news coming from Europe that they held a Friday congregation led by a woman, and it was mixed. So the worshippers, the followers, were men and women behind that imam lady who gave the khutbah and then prayed 2 rak'ahs of Jum'ah. What is this? This is not Islam. This is a new religion. But to publish articles about it and to highlight it and to cast doubts among the Muslims as if this is something modern and something that is hip and people should follow it, this is a great offense to Islam. It should be taken seriously. And these people should not be treated as normal Muslims, your everyday scholar who is making an ijtihad. No, this is something that goes against the consensus of all scholars of Islam. If these women think they're better than Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, or Hafsa, if they think they're more knowledgeable, we have a problem, a serious problem. And the funny thing is that the men praying behind them, if they're really men and not transgenders or something else, this is an issue that people should open their eyes to and really be careful from. Okay, then we have this part that deals with confirmation of the start of Ramadan. How do we know Ramadan starts? And this is a mega problem worldwide. Every single year, couple of weeks before Ramadan begins, should we have a united citing or not? Why do Muslims differ? Why do they have celebration of Eid on different days and not on the same day? Why do they not fast on the same day? And it goes on and on and on. And to the extent that some cities, like in Birmingham, in London, in Germany, in New York, elsewhere, you find communities in this. Some of them fast on a Saturday, other communities on a Sunday, and a third community on a Monday. So they have 3 different days of Eid. And some of the households may have 2 or 3 of their members fasting and celebrating Eid differently. So what's going on? Citing the crescent, the new moon, is part of Islam or not? Everyone says, yes, it is. Why? They said, because Allah Azza wa Jal told us, the Prophet taught us, alayhi salatu wasalam, Allah says in the Qur'an, يسألونك عن الأهلة قل هي مواقيت للناس والحج. They ask you about moon sighting and the crescents and the newborn moon. Say it is timings for Hajj, meaning that you know the seasons through knowing the time. And this is the beauty of depending on the lunar months rather than the Gregorian months. If anyone asks you, what day is it today? What day it is today? You need to refer to your watch, your calendar. Sometimes even you won't be able to know which month you're in. So if someone was lost on an island or in the desert or went into a coma and woke up, he wouldn't know which day definitely he's in. There's no way for him to know whether today is the 1st, the 15th, or the 30th of the month. Let alone when it is 28 days like Feb, or 31 days like this or that month, or 30 days like other months. So they don't know. No one can know. Only astronomers who do their calculations, and they are 1 in a million, maybe less, 1 in a 10 million, that can count and know. While in the lunar months, if you are stranded on an island, all what you have to do is look at the size of the moon, and you can immediately tell whether it is the middle of the month when you have a full moon, so it's either 13, 14 or 15th. When the moon is about to disappear and it disappears, you know that the month is over. When the new moon is born and the crescent appears after it was disappeared yesterday, you know today is one of the lunar month. So it is essential for Muslims to know how to worship Allah Azza wa Jal, and to know what month they are in, and this is possible only by following the moon, as mentioned in the Qur'an and in the Sunnah. So we all agree that moon sighting is needed to know what day of the month we're in and which month this is. No one differs about this. The problem is when it comes to different countries, as we do not have one Islamic ruler that rules all the Muslims, unfortunately. So each country has its own sovereignty. They have their own ruler, their own imam. And the Sunnah tells us that each region has their own sighting. As each region has its own prayer times. So if I'm in Saudi Arabia, I'm in the capital of Islam, I'm in Mecca, and we're praying Maghrib. Why did we pray Maghrib, by the way? Because the sunset. So can people in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, 5 hours from us, pray Maghrib with us? No. They prayed Maghrib 5 hours ago. Okay, what about people in the UK, in Manchester? Can they pray Maghrib with us? No, they still have like a couple of hours or 3 hours to go. The sun is in the middle of the sky. So you cannot unify prayer times, and hence you cannot unify fasting of Ramadan, because this requires sighting of the crescent. And this is problematic, but if people learn how to circle and unite with their Islamic authorities, we wouldn't have any problem. So there are Muslims in Kenya. Do they have one Islamic authority, or they have like gazillion groups? Each one claims to be the authority of the Muslims there. We have Muslims in Birmingham, UK, not Birmingham, Alabama. So what is happening there? This is something that they need to unite and look into their own dealings, because they cannot be disunited like this. This doesn't work like that. So the most authentic opinion is that the sighting of the new moon determines whether Ramadan has begun or not, and each region has their own sighting, as was mentioned in the authentic hadith when Ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, fasted in Medina or in Mecca region a day earlier than the people in Asham in Syria, where the caliphate was. So the Muslim ruler was a day earlier, and he did not follow that, and he said that this is the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, to abide by each and every one of their sighting of the new moon. And you start to fast, either if you sighted it yourself or someone you trust came up to you and said he cited it, or the whole community is fasting it. So in so many cases, in like 99.9 cases, we never cite the moon. It is someone else who does and testifies, and the court accepts it. So if the whole community started fasting based on that, this is a valid thing to follow them. And the Prophet ﷺ ordered us to fast when we see the crescent. There are two ways to begin fasting Ramadan. Either by citing the moon, or by the completion of the month of Sha'ban into 30 days. Because the Prophet told us that the month is this, let me see, okay, this or this. The month is either 29 days or 30 days. In Islam, we don't have 28 or 31. The days are either 29 in a month, a lunar month, a Hijri month, or 30 days. So when it's 29 days, everybody goes out, try to cite the moon. If they fail to cite the moon, simply because they couldn't see it, or if there were clouds, or it was a sandstorm that prevented people from citing the moon, the default becomes that tomorrow is the 30th of the month. And we are obliged to fast. And then by default, the day afterwards would be the 1st of Shawwal, the day of Eid. And this is what the Prophet instructed alayhi salatu wasalam. When it comes to the number of witnesses testifying to have seen the moon, it's an issue of dispute among scholars. Some say that it is required to have 2 witnesses seeing and citing the moon. And some say 1 is sufficient, and it's an issue of dispute. What counts is what the Muslims authorities follow in your country, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. I believe that we have taken too much time from today's session, and we have few questions to go through. So from last lessons questions, Afia says, Prophet ﷺ said that Allah loves deed which is regular even if it is little. My question is, if I do a deed regularly but I skip it once or twice in a month out of laziness or because of some work, does it count as doing it as Allah loves or not? Yes, it does. But of course, if you give 1 riyal a day to the poor regularly and you skip it twice a month, this means that you have given 28 riyals instead of 30. So your reward is less. But in totality, yes, you have done something that Allah loves because you're consistent. And Allah loves consistency even if the deed was a little or negligible. Hasleen has 2 or 3 questions. One of them, can women pray funeral prayer at home for her loved ones after the deceased is washed and shrouded and the deceased is in their home? The answer is yes. You can do that as long as the deceased body is in front of you and not in a different location. Can she pray funeral prayer in a relative's home if she goes to visit the deceased, if the deceased body is still in that relative's home? The answer is yes. Wherever you have the deceased body washed and shrouded, ready and present, you can offer funeral prayer, whether that is in the home, in a relative's house, in the masjid, in the graveyard itself. For men, there's no problem in offering that prayer. Her third question is, if I'm going to Hajj or Umrah from another country, I do not pray Sunnatul Isha, Sunnatul Dhuhr, Sunnatul Maghrib till I stay there in Saudi. I should engage in other acts of ibadah after finishing my fard. It seems that you have it confused, Haslin. The issue is not with Umrah or Hajj, the issue is with traveling. The Prophet ﷺ used to skip the Sunnah prayers of Dhuhr, 4 before, 2 after, and of Maghrib, 2 after, and of Isha, 2 after. Whenever he traveled, whether for Hajj, Umrah, or any other type of traveling, this is the Sunnah. So when you're in Mecca, or in Medina, or in Dubai, or in anywhere else traveling, then you skip these voluntary prayers and you pray anything else you want as usual. Duha, Ishraq, Istikhara, Tahiyyatul Masjid, the whole 9 yards. Whatever you want, you can pray without any problem. Aliz says, I have purchased a puppy to raise for a purpose in the future to guard our home. But till that time, we will treat it like a pet. I'm confused now whether to keep it in my garden area for the due reason, of course, is permissible or not. We don't allow it to enter inside our home. First of all, you have done a number of mistakes, Aliz. You bought a puppy, and the Prophet ﷺ prohibited buying and selling of puppies, of dogs, period. So it's not permissible to buy or sell any type of dogs, and the money is haram. Secondly, if you want to buy a dog for guarding purposes, to guard your home or your farm or your cattle, buying it is prohibited, but you can acquire it through gifts, through finding it on the street and picking it up, being a stray dog or whatever. Now, keeping it in your home is prohibited. Dealing with it as a pet, being friends with it and patting it and playing with it and considering it a member of the family, this is prohibited. The Prophet said, ﷺ, whoever keeps a dog in his home, every single day the reward of Mount Uhud is deducted from his good deeds. And not only that, the angels do not enter a house that has a dog in it. So if your reason is legit and it is accepted in Islam, and this is something I don't know, this is something between you and Allah Azza wa Jal. I've been to one of the brothers in Ghana, Accra, and he had like 3-4 dogs in his house. And I said, why are you having these dogs? And he said, this is for protection. We have lots of criminals and thugs and maybe people wanting to break into our homes. And this had happened before. Okay, if one is seriously in need of it to guard, yes. But if someone's taking a chihuahua, for example, and he says, oh, I have a dog. Chihuahua can be eaten by a cat. A big fat cat can eat it. Some rats attack it. So this is not a legitimate reason. So if your reason is legit, akhi, you can have this dog outside of your home. But this is something between you and Allah Azza wa Jal. Lyric says, I have 2 questions. 1, those who are blind and read the letters of the Qur'an by touching the so-called Braille Qur'an, will they have the same reward? The answer is yes, definitely. They're reading the Qur'an. What are they reading? A novel? tafsir. If it's the same Qur'an and they're pronouncing it correctly, then there's no problem in that. They are as rewarded as we are. Secondly, is this kind of Qur'an, the Braille Qur'an, permissible? The answer is yes. There's no, to my knowledge, distortion in the letters or in the pronunciation, and this is needed for those who are unable to read, those who are blind. So I see no problem in having it, inshallah, with these conditions. Number 7, Habiba says, I did appendix surgery, so I was told not to let water touch the affected area. So 3 days after I became pure from menses, and I took bath without letting water touch the area which was plastered. Is my ghusl valid? Your ghusl is valid providing that you have wiped over the plaster. Now you remember, maybe you don't. I personally don't, but most likely if you go back to the previous episode when we spoke about wudu, we said that washing is essential, is a must. But if a person has an injury, if your arm is broken and you have a cast, you cannot wash what's underneath. In so many cases, if you take the plaster off and you wash what's underneath it, the healing process is delayed or is harmed big time, because water is not supposed to touch the area. In this case, all scholars say that you perform wudu as usual, but when it comes to the area with the plaster, which is wrapped, you just wipe with wet hands. So you don't bring water and put it on top of it. No, your hands are wet. You just do this, and this is sufficient, insha'Allah Azza wa Jal. So I hope you managed to do this. If you tell me that, well, Sheikh, I cannot, and I'm unable to wipe over it because it's badly burnt, it's exposed, and I'm not supposed to get water near it. In this case, you have to perform normal ghusl, and without washing that area, and afterwards you need to go and perform dry ablution, which is tayammum for that skipped area. Habiba says, I have another question. I stayed at a place where I faced 20 degrees away from the Qibla, and I did this for like 2.5 weeks before it was corrected. Is my prayer valid? So we have this angle, and we have 90 degrees this angle. So 20 would make it this way. So moving this way, when the Qibla is that way or this way, does it impact my salat? The Prophet ﷺ was asked a similar question by his companions. And as we know, in Medina, the Qibla is to the south of Medina. So the Prophet told them, now you remember, the Qibla is to the south. The Prophet said to them, ﷺ, whatever is between the east and the west is Qibla. Which means even if I go like this, it's a Qibla. It's a Qibla for me. It's a Qibla for me. There's no problem in that. Diversion if it's unintentional. But if you know for sure that the Qibla is there and you pray to that direction, this is not possible. So to answer your question, Habiba, your 2.5 weeks of prayer is valid and correct, and there's no problem in that. Nasser Dawood says, is it necessary to wait for the adhan before praying Tahiyyat al-Masjid? I remember answering this before, but there's no problem in answering it again. Generally speaking, when you enter a masjid and the adhan is being called, it is recommended for you to repeat behind the mu'adhin, standing up of course, until he finishes. You offer salutation upon the Prophet ﷺ, and then you say the dua, Allahumma rabba hadhihi ad-da'wati at-tammah wa as-salati al-qa'imah ati Muhammadan al-wasilata wal-fadila wa ba'athu Allahumma al-maqam al-mahmud alladhi wa'adta innaka la tukhlifu al-mi'ad. This addition is an issue of dispute among scholars whether it is authentic or not. Sheikh bin Baz says it's authentic and it's accepted because this addition is from a trustworthy narrator. This is the norm, the generally speaking case, except if you enter the masjid while the imam is sitting on his chair and the mu'adhin is calling for the adhan, which means that immediately after the adhan is over, the imam would stand up and deliver his first sermon. If this is the case, no. You must pray 2 rak'ahs, tahiyyatul masjid, while the adhan is ongoing. You don't have to repeat it. Because you have one of two. Either repeat behind the mu'adhin while standing up, and then after he finishes, you begin your 2 rak'ah of tahiyyat al-masjid, which will coincide with the imam giving the khutbah, or you pray your 2 rak'ahs while the mu'adhin giving the adhan. So once you finish and he finishes, you're set, ready to go and listening to the imam wholeheartedly. And this is, the latter is what you're supposed to do. The khutbah of the imam is far more important than repeating after the mu'adhin, after the adhan. So I hope this answers your question. Sundus Navid says, can we wear a wig in cancer? Wearing a wig is prohibited for men and women, but women can wear a wig if there is a deformity, whether due to chemotherapy and the loss of all her hair, or due to any other reason. Now, we're not talking about having thin hair. We're talking about the loss of hair. So scholars say that in order to remove such a deformity, such a defect, it is permissible to wear a wig, and this is not part of connecting the hair to hair and not part of changing the creation of Allah. Rather, it is fixing something that needs to be fixed and restore it to its natural look, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. So I think we will stop here, hoping inshallah to meet again next Monday. So until then, I say to you, fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.